Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Welcome to Israel Unplugged, another great show. This is the show which brings you the unadulterated facts of where we're holding in the redemptive process, focusing primarily on the ingathering of the exiles. No spin, no twist, just the facts on the ground. I'm Josh Wander here from Yerushalayim, Ira Kodesh, and I'm here with my co-host, Rabbi Moshe Lichtman from Beit Shemesh.
Yes, hello. And today we're really going to talk about those issues, about where we're holding in the redemptive process. That's going to be the topic today.
Yes, what are the signs of redemption? How do we know that we're actually in the midst of it right now, and that Medinat Yisrael, being in the land of Israel today, is a huge part of that redemptive process? So we're going to be speaking all about that today. Don't forget to go to Rabbi Lichtman's website, Toratzion, TORATZION.com, where you'll find all of his books and shiurim on the subject of Eretz Yisrael. Also, don't forget to go to YouTube and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Israel Torah. You can also find it on our website, bringthemhome.org.il. And over there we have videos, we have webinars, we have live streams, we have this show, we have podcasts, we have blogs, lots of exciting, anything that you want to know regarding the redemptive process, about coming back to Eretz Yisrael, about Aliyah, the why one makes Aliyah, very, very important. Most people discuss the how, calling Nefesh B'Nefesh and going through the logistical steps of making Aliyah. But
Which
before
is
you get to that, it's very, very important. Right? But before you're going to even get to that step, you have to know, why should we make Aliyah? Why should we come back to Israel? And there are very, very good reasons why today we should be making Aliyah.
Right, I'll tell you something, a quick story about that. I got an email this week from somebody who says that he absolutely loves my book on Eretz Yisrael and the Parsha, and he says he really wants to come on Aliyah, but his wife is not there yet, is not at that point yet. So, like you're saying, I mean, you could want all you want, but you have to have everyone on board. And that's Absolutely. Why this show and these kind of discussions is what is important, to make a person realize that this is really where he belongs. Okay, so stay with us. We'll be back in a few minutes after the break. Don't go anywhere.
Israel is located in one of the most volatile areas in the world. Israel is an island of stability in a sea of war and unrest. In the midst of this turmoil, Israel stands out as a beacon of order and human progress. Each week we update you on what's happening in this, the Jewish state, a true light unto the nations. This is Jay Shapiro. Join me every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Okay, welcome back to Israel Unplugged. As we promised, we're going to be speaking about the signs of redemption and how we know that this is we are in the midst of the redemptive process. And the way I want to get to that topic is by way of talking about Techelet. Techelet is the blue color that the Torah commands us to wear on our tzitzit, on the strings, on our garments. Part of the strings are supposed to be blue, a bluish color, called Techelet, and it's supposed to come from a certain sea creature, let's call it. And also, it is a color that is part of the Big Day Kahuna, the garments that are needed for the high priest in the Beit HaMikdash, in the Holy Temple. And it is something that the Jewish people had and practiced for thousands of years, but sometime around 1,000, a little bit over 1,000 years ago, it fell out of practice. And without getting into everything about it, there are people who today have found, in their opinion, the lost chilazon, right? The lost. I'm getting feedback. Am I? Okay.
Yeah,
you're all hearing.
It's unbelievable because we Jews read the Kriyat Shema, the Shema Yisrael. Why do you wear tefillin? He says, well, it's a mitzvah in the Torah. It's great. You read it twice a day.
Correct. So again, without going into all the background, about 150 years ago, a certain Hasidic rabbi is known as the Radziner rabbi, started reinstituting or looking into this issue and trying to find out what is the real. I'm fine. Okay. What is the real tchelet, this blue color? So anyway, without getting into anything, it is a big discussion nowadays whether this is the real one or not. Okay. So there are many proofs, halachic proofs. There are many historical proofs and many archaeological proofs that the snail, which has to be the source of the tchelet, that the snail that a certain group of people called Ptil Tchelet, that they found, the Murex trunculus, that is the right, correct Tchelet, and therefore they, and I myself included, wear Tchelet, and there's thousands and thousands of people across the world today who wear this Tchelet. Josh, do you wear it?
I had one of the first 200 pairs. Baruch Hashem, I've been wearing it for almost 30 years.
Yeah, me too. So anyway, what does this have to do with the signs of Geula? Okay, so recently, two things happened. Number one, there's a beautiful video online. Right now, it slips my mind what it's called. Not just black and white, I think is what it's called, something like that, put out by a more ultra-Orthodox group of people. A beautiful video on this whole issue and bringing both sides, but clearly leaning towards the side to say that it is the correct Tchelet. It is the correct snail. And also, there was a beautiful presentation recently on Thanksgiving evening in a certain shul, in a synagogue in the United States, where they had a whole discussion about it. They had three speakers. One told all the reasons why it is the correct snail. And then they had a rabbi who was a very big Torah scholar who said, who agreed, but said, okay, I want to now give you what reasons others give for not wearing it. And amongst these reasons, and this was also on the other video that I was discussing, is that there is supposedly a midrash, a certain source, which says that the Tchelet was nignaz. Nignaz means it was hidden away, which is interpreted to mean that it was hidden away over 1,000 years ago until the Messiah comes. It doesn't say that in the midrash, but it does say the word nignaz, hidden away. So therefore they say, well, this is the greatest proof that it's not the correct Tchelet because Mashiach's not here. The Messiah is not here. So therefore it can't be the right Tchelet because we have this tradition somehow that it's only going to come back in the days of Mashiach, in the days of the Messiah. And this is something that I heard from many, many great rabbis just a few minutes ago when I was talking to Josh before the show. I heard that one of the greatest rabbis of our time says the same thing. And I told him about another great rabbi who says the same thing. And it's something that bothers me to no end. And that is, the reason is because I don't even understand the whole issue. I don't understand why that should be a proof that it's not the right Tchelet. Why? Because if anything, it's the exact opposite. If you believe that the Tchelet, the blue color, will not be revealed until Mashiach comes, and then we have something that looks like, smells like, and tastes like Tchelet, figuratively speaking, meaning something that it is so clear from all the sources, from 90% of the sources, let's put it that way, and especially 100% of the archaeological and historical sources, that this is the correct Techelet, maybe the reaction shouldn't be, well, it can't be because Mashiach's not here yet. Maybe the reaction should be, wow, maybe this has to be, that should tell us that we are living in the Messianic times. See, the problem is that people think that Mashiach is only when this specific person who is a descendant of David HaMelech comes, and when he comes and he's going to announce that he is the Messiah, then that's the days of the Mashiach. But we believe, and there are innumerous sources that indicate this, that it's a process. It's a long, it could be a very quick thing, but if we're not worthy, it's going to be a long, drawn-out process.
And this part is one of the greatest rabbis of the past generation, known as the Vilna Gaon, who lived in Vilna. Obviously, he lived between 1720 and 1797. He actually says this in a number of his works, where it speaks about the idea of a Mashiach ben Yosef and a Mashiach ben David, and that Mashiach ben Yosef is a redemptive process. That's a Mashiach, but it's a process of Mashiach versus Mashiach ben David, which is the actual king, which will arise at the end of this process.
Correct, 100%. And again, there's we don't have enough time to go into all the sources that say this, but this is undeniable, really undeniable in Torah. You can't have a rabbi who knows anything about Torah and deny that the Messianic era is a process. And therefore, just like we are starting, the Jewish people are starting, and not only starting, and we are already way, way past starting the return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel and the rebuilding of the land of Israel. So just like that happened, and we believe very strongly that is part of the process, and it's necessary so that when the Messiah comes, he'll have where to go, he'll have what to do. You see, the problem is that people think, and it's really out of total ignorance, people think that Mashiach is going to come, riding, of course, on a white donkey, and he's going to snap his fingers, and all the Jews are going to just gather around him, somehow fly with him to the land of Israel. And then they're going to come down into the land of Israel, and houses are going to start popping up out of the ground, and fruits and vegetable trees and everything are going to start sprouting up from the land, and everyone's going to plop down and be able to live happily ever after in the land of Israel. Well, sorry, that's not that's just silliness. It's really foolish. That's not the way it's going to happen. It's a process. So the land of Israel had to be first prepared for the coming of the Mashiach. And part of the preparation of the coming of Mashiach is also we're going to have a Beit HaMikdash. We're going to have a temple. And as I said before, part of the temple is we need Bigdei Kahuna, the garments of the Kohen. And in order to have the garments of the Kohen, we need Techelet. So therefore, it's only natural that in this time period, things like Techelet are going to be discovered. Things that we haven't had in such a long time are going to start to be discovered, so that we can be ready for the coming of Mashiach.
We had this discussion over Shabbat. We were discussing at the Shabbat table with a learned yeshiva student, and I was explaining that, first of all, exactly what you were saying, that Maimonides explains that everything is going to go according to the laws of nature, B'derech HaTeva, and things are not going to change in the times of Mashiach. But I said that even if you don't want to accept that, and even you think that everything, Mashiach is going to appear out of the blue, and the Beis HaMikdash the temple is going to fall out of the sky, and everybody's going to be transported on the wings of eagles miraculously. I said, even if you accept that type of opinion, I said, nobody says that everybody's just going to learn all the laws that are required at that time. So there are many, many laws. In fact, over a third of the laws of the commandments refer to temple services and tuma and tara and the purity and impurity and sacrifices. And if you don't know this stuff, you're not just going to know it the day that Mashiach comes. I think there's so much to talk about here. But I just want to mention people that are interested in Techelet. There's a great book called The Rarest Blue by Baruch Sturman. It's the remarkable story of an ancient color lost to history and rediscovered. So people that are interested in having the whole background of Tchelet should definitely look up that book, The Rarest Blue.
Okay, so we're about to go to a break. So don't go anywhere because we're right in the middle and we're going to continue talking about this discussion. I'm going to explain even further why we are clearly living during the Messianic era.
The Tamar Yona Show.
Tamar? She's sassy.
She's smart.
She's funny.
But she's also a real Jewish mother.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tamar Yona. And yes, I can be all of those things. But at Israel News Talk Radio, I'm here to bring you the news stories and guests that you may not hear anywhere else. Join me live on air Sundays, Mondays, and Tuesdays for the most unique and bold talk radio in Israel.
The Tamar Yona Show.
Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Did you know this psalm and many others were composed by a Jewish shepherd and musician who later became a king? Would you like to know some of the inner meanings of psalms to help you connect with God and strengthen your soul? An exciting and easy-to-read book is now available which will help you do just that. Software for the Soul, Psalms for Everyone, available on Kindle, Audible, and Amazon.com. Software for the Soul.
Okay, welcome back to Israel Unplugged. We're in the middle of a very important discussion. And as I told you, we are starting with the issue of Techelet, of the blue. So as I said, there are those who say this can't be the correct Techelet because Mashiach's not here yet. And it just boggles my mind every time I hear it, even though I have to admit, some of the greatest rabbis in the world say it, but I think it's because they don't believe that we are in the beginning of the redemption, which I don't understand why. I cannot understand it. So therefore they say, well, this can't be the right Techelet because Mashiach's not here yet. And again, even though it's one very minor source in the whole discussion of Techelet, and it's not even 100% clear from that you have to wait for Mashiach to come. Nonetheless, as I said, I believe very strongly that that's not a claim why it's not the real Techelet. Because if anything, it's a proof that we are living in the Messianic era. The fact that things like this have been discovered, and more things are going to be discovered. Who knows? Maybe one day, we're gonna get a red heifer. Maybe a red heifer is going to come. And what are people going to say? It can't be because it's not until the days of Mashiach. Well, when are they going to understand? And by the way, there was a few times we already almost had a red heifer. And a para aduma, right? A red heifer. So when that happens, what are people going to say? No, it can't be because Mashiach's not here yet. No, maybe that's the whole point. It's also ridiculous to even think about the fact that half the Jewish people live in Eretz Yisrael. We forget, the problem is that people today, we were all born into a world where there is a state of Israel. And we think it's totally natural that the Jewish people, half the Jewish people are living in the land of Israel. That's not natural. 100 years ago, we were in the lowest of the lows. 80 years ago, we were being burnt to death in the concentration camps. And now we are sovereign in our own land, and we don't realize that is the Etchalta de Geula, the beginning of the redemption. There's a big problem here. So at the end of this video that I told you about in this synagogue, where they had three speakers, so the last speaker, so again, the middle speaker was the one who was giving the other side a little bit, explaining what the reasons for the other side, the naysayers. And as I said, he mentioned as one of the reasons that this midrash that says that it was put away, it was hidden away until Mashiach. Again, it doesn't say the words until Mashiach comes, but that's what they claim. So it really bothered me that he didn't just say, well, but that's not really a good claim because maybe, like I just said, maybe that proves that we are in the days of Mashiach. But anyway, afterwards, the last speaker was Rav Hershel Schachter, my Rebbe, and he discussed a whole different aspect of the the issue of Techelet, and then literally in the last 5 seconds, he said the following. He said, and by the way, about the Mashiach's not here yet. Well, who would have believed that we would have Medinat Yisrael, that we'd have the state of Israel? And that's clearly the Yitchalta de Geula. That's clearly the beginning of the Geula. And therefore, it's not a reason not to wear Tchelet because you believe that this is not that you need Mashiach. Yeah, okay, well, we are in the process. And since we're in the process, it therefore is very possible and probable that we will find things like this. We will reinstate different aspects of Judaism that were lost during the thousands of years of exile. Josh, you with us? You came back on? Okay. All right. I think your microphone is off. Are you on? Okay. I thought you might want to comment. It's hard to hear you, so I'm going to continue. So let's talk about how we know that this is the Itchalta de Geula, this is the beginning of the redemption. I want to quote something from you to you from one of the greatest thinkers of our time, maybe a little bit less known to some people, but somebody who was prolific. His name was Rav Aryeh Kaplan. Rav Aryeh Kaplan, in a writing period, in a period of only 12 years, he wrote 66 books. He was absolutely prolific, an absolute genius, and he has many books on Kabbalah, on mysticism, and on many different issues. One of his books, there's a lot of little pamphlets. One of them is called The Real Messiah. Now, the majority of the book is actually disproving Christian missionaries, basically showing that the real Messiah is not who they say the real Messiah is, Yeshu, however you want to call him, but rather, so therefore he's not the real Messiah. But one chapter is the one that's actually called The Real Messiah, where he gives a whole explanation of what the real Messiah is going to be like. And in it, he says as follows. You have to listen to these words. And again, remember, this is a person who knew everything. He was an absolute genius, knew the entire Torah. He writes as follows. I'm sorry, I'm just looking for it here. Here you go. Other generations have expected the Messiah's imminent appearance based on the forced interpretation of one or two prophecies. You have to understand. I'm interjecting here. You have to understand that Jews always anticipated the coming of Mashiach, and sometimes to their detriment, like with the whole Shabtai Tzvi, the Sabbatean movement. So he tried to convince them that he was the Messiah, and he led many, many Jews astray because of that. So it's a very dangerous thing. But they based their anticipation of the coming of the Messiah on the forced interpretation of one or two prophecies. Whereas we, continues Rav Aryeh Kaplan, whereas we are living through the entire range of Messianic tradition. Now, whenever I say this, I say, you have to understand, I don't know the entire range of Messianic tradition. I don't know many people in the world who do know the entire range of Messianic tradition. But I do know that Rav Aryeh Kaplan did, because he knew everything. And he is telling us that we are living through the entire range of Messianic tradition, often coming to pass with uncanny literalness. If you keep your eyes open, you can almost see every headline bringing us a step closer to this goal. So, a lot of times when I talk about this issue of the signs of redemption, so people say, every generation thought that Mashiach was coming. You're right. But they had to interpret one or two prophecies and force an interpretation. We don't have to do that. We have we have the entire range of Messianic tradition, which means what? The Talmud talks about, I'll start with the first one, okay? Probably the most important, the one that the Talmud itself says is the clearest sign of redemption. And you have to understand, the Talmud gives many, many different possible scenarios and signs of the coming of the Messiah. But never does the Gemara say, and this is it, this one really pay attention to, because this is big, right? There's only one time it says that, and it's in the Talmud Sanhedrin 98a, where the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Ava, Ein lecha kates megule mizeh. There is no clearer end, which means sign of the end of days, than the following verse in Yechezkel and Ezekiel. All he does is quote a verse in Ezekiel. You, O mountains of Israel, will give forth your branches and yield your fruit to my people Israel, for they are soon to come. In other words, Rashi, the famous commentator to the Talmud and to the Tanakh, says, what does this mean? What is Rabbi Abba trying to say? That this is the clearest sign of redemption is, and he just quotes a verse in Ezekiel. What does he mean? The answer is, says Rashi, when the land of Israel gives forth its fruits in abundance, the end will be near, and there is no clearer sign of the end of days. So we have to give a little background for this, because there is another very important source that tells us that when the Jews were exiled from the land of Israel stopped producing its fruits. The land of Israel became absolutely desolate. It was foreseen, it's written explicitly in the Torah itself, not even in the Nevi'im, not even in the prophets. In the Torah itself, it says that the land of Israel will be desolate to the Jewish, for not only for the Jewish people, for the enemies of the Jewish people who will try to take over the land. They won't be successful, because the land of Israel will remain desolate. And we know historically that is an absolute fact of history. The land of Israel was completely desolate for close to 2,000 years. So much so, there are a lot of testimonies to this. There's the Ramban gives a testimony to this, but I want to read to you. Exactly. I want to read to you the more well-known, I think, one, and that is Mark Twain. Yes, Mark Twain wrote a book called The Innocents Abroad, where he basically traveled the world, and he wrote about his travels, and he says as follows: in the mid-1800s. Okay, we don't have enough time. We'll just quickly start it until our break. He says. He calls Palestine, which is what it was called at the time, a hopeless, dreary, heartbroken land, right? There is far-reaching desolation on all sides. Palestine sits in sackcloth and ashes. Over it broods the spell of a curse that has withered its fields and fettered its energies. Palestine is desolate and unlovely, and why should it be otherwise? So right after the break, we'll continue this and we'll explain that that's what Rabbi Ava was saying, that when the land of Israel returns and gives its fruits once again, that is the clearest sign of the redemption.
In a time where feelings have become fact, where rational thought and common sense has disappeared, one man stands above it all.
I'm Howie Sobiker, your political hitman.
Political Hitman airs every Tuesday at 11:59 p.m. North American time, 7 a.m. Israeli time, only on Israel News Talk Radio.
Are you interested in transforming your life, drawing closer to the Creator, and uncovering the deeper meanings and hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
and me, William Hall,
on the Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Okay, welcome back for our last segment of Israel Unplugged for today. We were just discussing the signs of the redemption, and we started with the first one, which is which the Talmud itself says is the clearest sign of redemption, and that is when the land of Israel starts rejuvenating. And we explained because 2,000 years of exile, the land remained desolate, which was a clear prophecy in the Torah that was fulfilled. And then the land started giving forth its fruits once again, and you can't deny that. How is that able to be denied? Go to Machane Yehuda and see how many beautiful fruits the land of Israel is producing. We even export to other countries. It is clearly
Who's heard of Jaffa
fulfillment.
oranges?
Who, Jaffa oranges?
Yes, who's heard of the Jaffa oranges that made Israel famous?
Right. Okay, so Josh, you wanted to say something on this issue.
Yeah, I want to say two quick things. First of all, when it comes to this prophecy, not only does it work in the direction that you're suggesting, that since the Jews have come back, that we have that the land has blossomed, but it also works in the opposite direction, and that is that if those people that know about the disengagement of Gaza, so the areas that the Jews were in Gaza, the towns that they built, they were flourishing. They had a whole industry of hydroponic vegetables that were made in the hot houses of the greenhouses in the Gaza Strip. It was flourishing. And when we left, unfortunately, when the Jews were evicted from the Gaza...
Hello? Josh, I think we lost you. I can finish Josh's sentence. When we were evicted from the Gaza Strip, and there was a whole movement to try to give all the greenhouses to the Palestinians, and besides the fact that they destroyed a lot of them, but even the ones who did try to
it is clear to the end. The Talmud speaks about 6,000 years that the world as we know it is going to exist. Today we are in the year 781 according to the years since the creation of the world, and that leaves a little bit more than 200 years for the world as we know it to exist. And what that means is that every prophecy, every good prophecy in the Bible and the Tanakh has to come true in the next 2 centuries, and there has to be a reign of the divinic reign. So this all has to happen in a very short time. That's why everything is happening very quickly today, because we have very little time left on the clock.
Correct. In fact, I'll add something to that. Is one of my favorite stories. So I was once teaching that particular Gemara that you just quoted, that the world is 6,000 years, and I was explaining, just like you said, that it's clear that things are starting. That's why things started around 300 years before the year 6,000. And then one of my students raised, I remember it was a girl in one of the girls' schools that I taught in, seminaries that I taught in, and she raised her hand and she said, "Rabbi, what is going to happen when the year 6,000 comes and Mashiach isn't here yet? What are you going to do then?" So I answered, sometimes when you're a teacher, you get what's called siyata dishmaya. You get heavenly assistance to give the right answer. And I think this was the correct answer. I said, you know what? I'll be very honest with you. If I was giving this class 100 years ago in the depths of exile in somewhere in Europe, and I was discussing this issue and someone raised their hand, I would only be able to say we have full belief that whatever it says in the Gemara is going to come true, and Mashiach will be here before the year 6,000. But I would not have had a real good answer for what's going to happen if it doesn't, because you know what? We're close, and it's still nothing is happening. So I would have really sort of try to avoid the question, and I would have said, no, I believe. But I said, you know what? I don't have that question anymore. There's no doubt in my mind, even the slightest doubt, that by the year 6,000, way before that, the Messiah will be here and we will be living in utopian society of Mashiach. Why? Because already so much has happened. You can't ask anymore what's going to happen if not. It's not like nothing has happened. So much has happened towards the eventual Geula that it's not even a question anymore of whether by the year 6000 Mashiach will come. It's just, what day, is it going to come tomorrow or the next day or the next day? It's clear, as we've been discussing today. Half the Jewish people, which is really the next sign of Geula. So let's review the first sign that I usually emphasize, and that is the reflourishing of the land of Israel, which is, in the words of the prophet himself, a prerequisite for the ingathering of the exiles. Because the verse from Yechezkel, from Ezekiel, says, "O mountains of Israel, give your fruit, give forth your branches, and yield your fruit to my people Israel." And then the end of the verse is, "For they are near to come," meaning the land has to become rejuvenated. It has to start giving forth its fruits so that Jews can come back. And that is the next step. And in fact, this is actually not even a sign of redemption. Some people say, one of the greatest signs of redemption today is the fact that we have the ingathering of the exiles. I say that's not even a sign. That is actual redemption. The first thing, the rejuvenation of the land prior to the mass return of Jews, that was a sign. And that was, as the Talmud said, the clearest sign of the redemption. But once the Jews start returning to the land of Israel en masse, that's not a sign. That is actual Geula. If you look through the prophecies, all the prophecies talk about the return of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. And that's not a sign of the Geula. That is the Geula. It's the physical Geula. It's the physical redemption. It's not yet the spiritual redemption. The spiritual redemption will come later, and that's when the Messiah will come, and before him, Elijah the prophet, who will return the Heshiv levavot al banim v'lebanim al avotam. They will return the Jewish people to their Father in heaven, meaning make the Jewish people understand that we should be keeping the laws of the Torah. And the third temple will be rebuilt. However, whether miraculously or we'll have to do it, doesn't matter. That already is the spiritual redemption. But the physical redemption of the Jewish people is the return of the Jewish people physically to the land of Israel. So we are talking about the actual fulfillment of the beginning of the redemption, not a sign of the beginning of redemption, the actual beginning of redemption. Now, I can prove from here to tomorrow that this is the ingathering of the exiles, but as I always like saying, I feel silly trying to prove something that's just black and white. That's like saying, I don't know. Let's say it's snowing outside, right? I'm going to prove to you that it's snowing outside, and I'll go and I'll bring books and I'll use mathematical equations to prove it to you. Why do I have to prove it to you? Just look out the window. It's obviously snowing, right? Same thing here. Why do I have to prove to you? And again, I have some beautiful proofs, but we don't have enough time in this short segment to really bring all those proofs. Maybe next week we'll continue a little bit on this, but it's so obvious. And in fact, in what we just talked about a minute ago, what I just said, my theory that the ingathering of the exiles is not a sign of redemption, but rather the actual beginning of the redemption. I have a very clear proof from the Rambam. The Maimonides, when Maimonides discusses these issues in Hilchot Melachim, the laws of kings, he talks about how, there's going to be a Messiah, there's going to be a redemption, and he says that someone who doesn't believe in the redemption, or, he writes, or who doesn't await the redemption, which is a very important point, because it's not enough to just believe in it, you also have to await with bated breath the redemption, which means do everything in your power to bring the redemption and to take the redemption, to accept it when it happens. But anyway, so the Maimonides says that anybody who doesn't believe in the redemption or await its arrival, not only does he deny, kofer in Hebrew, kofer means deny, it's a stronger word than denial, but whatever. Not only does he deny the words of the prophets, because that's like black on white. The prophets talk day and night about the messianic times, But also he denies Moshe Rabbeinu and the Torah itself, because you know what? Moshe Rabbeinu also talked about it. And then he quotes a verse from Parshat Nitzavim, right? And in that verse, the verse says, I'm trying to look for it, right? He quotes the verse from Devarim, Deuteronomy 33-5, that says, if you're dispersed will be at the end of the heavens. From there the Lord your God will gather you, and from there he will take you, and the Lord your God will bring you to the land. Right? He'll bring you back to the land of Israel. And think about what the Rambam just said. The Rambam said, I'm going to prove to you that if you don't believe in the coming of Mashiach, right, the Messiah, then, right, he even says, anyone who doesn't believe in him is talking about a person, meaning the Messiah. Anyone who doesn't believe in him is a denier of the prophets and Moshe Rabbeinu. And what's his proof from which verse? The verse that talks about one thing, the ingathering of the exiles. It doesn't talk about a Messiah. It just talks about the ingathering of the exiles, because the ingathering of the exiles is itself the coming of Mashiach. Now, of course, there is going to be an actual person descended from King David who is going to lead us. He is going to come and he's going to bring about the spiritual redemption. But the physical redemption we have already seen. And that's why it is clear that we should expect things like finding Techelet. Of course, we're going to find Techelet because we're in the Messianic era. Things are starting, and unfortunately, we've run out of time. Maybe we'll continue this next week. Maybe we'll just talk about Hanukkah. We'll see you next week. Please join us again. Leitraot.
Where can you get the inside news on Israel? At Israel News Talk Radio, we're dedicated to sharing Israel's inside story with the world by providing our listeners with news on Israeli politics, current affairs, and Israeli Jewish culture. The Israel News Talk Radio homepage also provides you, the listener, with useful information at your fingertips, with scrolling news headlines, weather, currency exchange, Shabbat candlelighting times, and so much more. Our radio programming is always accessible and on demand. We operate absolutely free of charge for everyone, everywhere. If you love what we do, partner with us now by becoming an Israel News Talk Radio supporter. With your support, you'll be inscribed on our Israel News Talk Radio Wall of Fame. There's nothing like us in the world. Be part of something great. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
Howdy, this is Rita from League City, Texas, now living in Israel. And though my heart may have belonged to Texas, it now belongs to Israel and all the fantastic show hosts at Israel News Talk Radio.
Hi, this is Michael Solomon from Kiryat Arba, Israel. And why do I love listening to Israel News Talk Radio? Because I love listening to the interesting interviews they do and their news reporting that most other media sources don't cover.
Hey, this is Nicoleko from Malmö, Sweden. It gets pretty cold here in Sweden, so I love cuddling up with a warm cup of tea while I listen to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey everybody, this is Frank Morris from Tennessee. Me and my dog Buster really love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.